I hope everybody on Zoom can hear me okay. I just want to, before we really get into everything, I just want to put a quick disclaimer here. I understand that today, we are all in a Pentecost mood and we've been in and out of Acts. You've got to bear with me. My first name, I'm named after Paul Fisher. I'm Paul Fisher II. And when your first name is Paul and you go to Catholic school for a decade, every report you've ever done is on St. Paul. You have to forgive me. So today I went a little bit off schedule, we're going to go back into the Old Testament and some personal things that I'm doing with my own life, as well as how the story of David shows us a guidance through those times. I also want to say that I understand a 20-year-old up here trying to teach you life circumstances and life experiences is kind of dumb. If you're over the age of 81, you have 3 times the life experiences that I do. If you're over 54, you've got more than double. But I hope that I can maybe just provide a little reminder so that if something like this happens in your own life, in your kids' life, in your grandkids' life, just a little reminder that God's got it. That's my little disclaimer to start all this, and then we'll just jump into it.
Thanks.
Yes.
Before you start the lesson, just so you and everybody knows who's on Zoom this morning, because we got a great crowd on Zoom.
Awesome.
Hap Roberts, Dave Caldwell, Bob Lewis, Robin Fisher, you know her, Annette Roberts, Jake Alexander, Gordon and Jeff Hurley, Jay Whittington, Irv Philpott, you know the Philpotts, Bill Wagner, Steve Fisher, you know him,
Big time.
Ozzie Reynolds, Chris Bradshaw, your brother Max from Nashville, Tennessee, or Atlanta, wherever he is, and then Polly Rose and Eliza Pearl.
Yep, those are 2 more Philpotts.
Okay, good. So we got a great crowd to hear you.
Well, since Jack is on the Zoom, Jack will love this. I'm going to start. Jack, my brother, has been dating the same girl since he was in the 7th grade, on and off for 10 years. Wow. And the first time she came over to our house when she was in the 7th grade, the parents dropped her off. And she sat at our back door for 15 minutes before coming in. She was not scared of Jack, but in our living room, my father and I were having one of our screaming, so loud you could hear it from the neighbors, just yelling at each other. She was so scared to come in. And finally, when the volume came down in our argument, she came in. Lo and behold, what were we arguing about? LeBron James and Michael Jordan. I am a Jordan guy, but I am a LeBron fan. My father would tell you that LeBron is on his list, and that list includes like FDIC members. So like, you can imagine where he meets LeBron. That's what our argument. But I think that this is an awesome place to start our conversation today. The greatest of all time. The GOAT is what they call it, my generation called it. We love to sit around and argue who the GOAT is in anything. The GOAT chicken sandwich. Is it Chick-fil-A? Is it Popeyes? We do baseball, we do basketball, any sport imaginable. But I thought a fun exercise for us at Everyman is just to get us awake and going. Would be I Googled the GOAT, greatest of all time, musicians. And I've got some pictures, and I just thought, let's see if we can, Everyman's can name it. Okay? And if you disagree with any, don't worry, Hap is not on. Okay? So the first one, I thought this was pretty good. This is Elvis Presley. That's got to be on the list. Everybody agrees, right? Everybody agrees there. What about here? Paul McCartney, he's got to be on the list. Him or John Lennon, one of the two. The link to the John Lennon picture was broken, so I put McCartney. What about that? Hank Sr. I think Hank's got to be on that list, right? Yeah. How about him? Johnny Cash. And then I think if I were to survey this room, the one individual I have not shown that should be on this list would be who? What do we think? The greatest musician of all time.
Frank Sinatra.
Willie should be on there, but Frank Sinatra, whoever said that. Willie should be on there. You're exactly right. Willie should be on there.
Well, Little Richard also.
Well,
How about Mozart?
Well, Mozart, yes, and Beethoven should definitely be a part of that conversation as well. They didn't have an actual photography. But to show you that my generation, the generations around me, love talking about this so much, Pastor Josh actually about 2 months ago brought up an idea of who the GOAT of the Old Testament prophets and kings were. That was a sermon that he gave. Now, he mentioned it briefly. He wanted to just emphasize how important Moses and Elijah were to the chosen people because of them getting them out of Egypt. But I thought that a correlation to our musical topic and our prophets and kings topic is who I consider to be the GOAT king of Israel, the greatest of every king of Israel, and the greatest musician of all time. And that leads us to David, the man with the harp, the guy who had a spear in one hand and a harp in the other, the writer of the majority of the Psalms and some of Proverbs, who also was the first Israelite king to deliver them from the Philistines. That's his crowning achievement. Now, I personally think, and this is our lesson today, lessons from your 20s, God's plans for David. I think that Sunday school, as we know it, does a very poor job of explaining the story of David. When we think David, I think of two stories. The first one, David and Goliath. That is the story they give you. That's like one of the Daniel in the lion's den and David and Goliath. That's like the first two they teach you, and maybe Christmas and Easter when you're coming up through Sunday school. David's got a second story that doesn't usually come up until like upper level high school youth because it's a little bit scandalous.
David and Bathsheba.
David and Bathsheba. But here's our David and Goliath picture. David and Bathsheba. He is on top of his kingdom looking down upon it and sees the most beautiful woman he's ever seen. He finds out that woman's name is Bathsheba, and she is married to Uriah. Uriah is a soldier in his army. So what does David do? He gets him killed, sends him to the front line. He is killed, and David's able to marry Bathsheba. And the point of the David and Goliath story is that through God all things are possible. A 14-year-old, we don't actually know how old David was at the time. It's suspected he's somewhere between 14 and 20 when he kills Goliath. But through God, anything is possible. The 9-foot giant was taken down by a bull. Then the story of Bathsheba teaches us that even the great David can fall, but he still found favor in the Lord. And those are the two main stories we get. I would argue to you that we don't get the best story. Bear with me for a second. In Rocky, is the best part of Rocky him winning that first boxing fight or then going around and collecting money for the mobsters? Is it the end when he goes the distance? I would argue to you neither of those stories are the best. The best part is the training. It is you got going the distance point now, he's running up the streets of Philly, arms in the air. That's the best part of the story. I think that David's training arc, David's experiences between slaying Goliath and becoming king are the best part of David's story and the part that I currently relate to my own. So we're going to jump right into it. After slaying Goliath, David comes under Saul's care and becomes best friends with Saul's son, Jonathan. Now, depending on how old you want to place David at the time, it's said that he wouldn't have been allowed into Saul's work if he wasn't 20 in numbers, but scholars say that he could have been, once again, as young as 14. But let's just say around 17 or so is when he comes under Saul's care. And he stays under Saul's care until he is 23 years old. So for 7 years, he's been living with them, dining with them, eating with them. And then one day, the guy, the king of Israel, who he's supposed to replace one day, sets out to kill him. And that begins right here in 1 Samuel 19, 1 through 3. Saul told his son Jonathan and all the attendees to kill David. But Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him, "My father Saul is looking for a chance to kill me. Be on your guard tomorrow morning, go into hiding and stay there. I will go out and stand with my father in the field where you're at. I'll speak to him about you and will tell you what I find out." So Jonathan goes and talks to Saul, and Saul's like, "No, I'm not going to kill him. I've changed my mind. I know I'm jealous of him, but you're right. That would just be crazy. I was God's anointed to lead Israel. David is the next in line." So Jonathan goes back to David and says, "Hey, he's not going to kill you. We're good to go." So David stays. Until an evil spirit comes upon Saul. As he's sitting in his home with his spear in his hand. While David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with his spear. But David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made his escape. So think about just, David, the young shepherd, kills Goliath, is told he's going to be the next king of Israel, lives with the current king of Israel's family for somewhere between 5 and 7 years. Wakes up one day and now the king's trying. That would not be the greatest thing to run into. Here's a little illustration. He's dodging the spear that Saul throws at him with the harp in one hand, and he runs away. Now, David runs away from Saul for a total of 7 years. We know that because in 2 Samuel 5, we learn that after 7 years of running, David becomes king. After Saul is defeated by the Philistines. He does a lot in those 7 years. A whole lot. This is a map of everywhere he goes, and starting 1, 2. We don't have time for that. That is a 6-month Bible study. He does some amazing things. He has 3 different opportunities to kill Saul, but does not on any of those chances, including the famous one that you might know, that Saul was defecating in a cave, and David happened to come behind him and decided, I will not kill this man that is God's anointed. Those are amazing stories that should be given their own weight, but today I just want to focus on 3, I would call it life-altering things that David does. The first one, we need to go back a little bit to Goliath. Does anybody remember where Goliath was from in the room? Start with a G. Gath. She knows because she's heard me do this.
No fair.
David is running from Saul, can't get away. Saul is chasing him down, and so David thinks, I will go into the land of Gath, because Gath was such a strong military power that the Israelites would never be able to get in. If you remember, the reason that the people of Gath wanted them to fight Goliath is that, the people of Gath would have won that fight regardless. They were a much stronger army than the Israelites at the time, and so they thought, we're not going to lose anybody, just send out and see if somebody can defeat Goliath. Then obviously David defeats him and things change. But they thought, I'll hide there. The only problem is when you kill, the Achilles of Gath and then want to go stay there, it's not going to work out the best. So the second that he gets there, he gets rounded up and taken to the king. That day, David fled from Saul and went to Achish, king of Gath. Now, Achish is not a name. It's like a title, like a pharaoh. This is the pharaoh of Gath, if you can think about that. But the servants of Achish said to him, isn't this David, the king of the land? Isn't he the only one that sing about their dances? Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. David took these words to heart and was very much afraid of what that king would do to him when he found out, hey, this is the guy. So what does David do? And I'm not going to read all of it. David pretends to be mad, making marks on the doors of the gate and letting saliva run down from his feet. Achish says to his servants, look at the man, he's insane. Why bring him to me? So David is playing. This is the guy who was going to be the king of Israel. Brought down to such a low extent, he is acting insane, begging for his life in the land of his enemies. I think you might call that a low point. He is deep down there. And he stays in Gath for, it's very much debated if it's 6 months the first time or about a year the first time. We don't really know. But that's how long he is walking around on all fours, pretending to be a madman amongst the people of Gath. The second one I want to look at is his return to Gath. So in that time when he was crazy, this Achish king realizes, hey, this guy's not crazy. But he doesn't seem to be a harm to me, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Thank you. So maybe we'll let this David guy hang around. Well, David says, thank you, but I'm going to go off anyway. So David goes off and goes through these adventures and whatnot, and is still on the run, and finally decides, after about 5 years away from Gath, to return. So he returns back to the same king, and they strike a bargain. That is recorded here. He is going to give him this land, Ziklag. So David and his people, David is not the only person on the run. I should have made that clear. David had about 600 followers, 600 men and their families with him through this entire journey. But he comes back and he says, great king, give us a place to live and we will work as mercenaries for you. So they give him Ziklag, and all of the family goes and stays there. And then David and his 600 men work as mercenaries for the Philistines, for Gath, which is kind of crazy to think. I mean, this is a guy going to be the leader of the Israelites who had to be act crazy to live, is wandering, hiding in caves, going this, that, and the other, ends up back in Gath and is now working for the bad guy as a mercenary. Basically they would go out and raid villages that they thought might someday be a problem to Gath. But that's the deal they struck. And for a year and a half, David and his men did this. A year and a half, they would leave the women and children in Ziklag, which was supposed to be protected by Gath. And they would go out, do their thing, come back. So 18 months, that goes on. Until one day, they come back, and all of the women and children were taken. Now, what is so interesting about this is that, and once again, this is a scholarly debate as to the time frame this is occurring, but we know that when they went out on their last mission and the women and children were stolen away from Ziklag and taken away, that is the same time that the main Philistine army, within 2 years, goes on to conquer Israel and kill Saul. Now, technically, Saul took his own life, but it was kind of like I hate to use the Hitler analogy, but Hitler knew the Russians were coming, and so he shot himself. Saul's son had been killed, and so he told his other 2 sons to kill him before the Philistines come the next day. So this is kind of happening at the same time. You could make the connection that perhaps they took the women and children away from Ziklag so that David could not be reinforcements to the main Israel army. That's not grounded in fact. That's just a hypothesis looking at it of what might have occurred. But he comes back from Ziklag or to the Ziklag. He does not find the women and children. They're all gone, and everyone wants to stay. That's what everyone wants to do. We followed you for 7 years, man. We were okay. You were pretending to be crazy. We were okay living in caves. We've been okay working as mercenaries for the bad guy. But now all of our wives and children are dead. You got to go. And so what does David do? He doesn't do, oh, why, my God, has thou forsaken me? No. David just goes and prays and asks, what should I do? And God, tells him that the women and children actually have not been murdered. They've just been taken away, and they have time to get to them before they're sold into slavery. So David and his 600 men go and do what they do, and they get the women back. This is a pretty cool picture, I think, of the march. The march that the women had to do and children had to do is similar, like, think Trail of Tears, like. And so it is like a miracle from God that when they get the women and children back, not a single one was dead. I mean, it's a miracle from God. Not that the enemy did not slay them, but that in their passage from one place to the next, they were not slain. So all of this happens. The main Philistine army has been defeated. Now David comes in as king. He has his 600 men and what is left of the rest of the Israelites. And they form together, and the kingdom of Israel rises back up to where it was before. Until, find out in 2 Samuel 5, David finally delivers the Israelites from the Philistines. Now, I think that in the Old Testament, we get kind of bogged down with names, and like we know that Moses getting the Israelites out of Egypt was a super big deal. I mean, like, they were in slavery. It's amazing. I would say that, like, this, if that's 1A, this is 1B. The Philistines were over and around Israel, their entire being up until this point. And several kings, Saul included, had attempted to go and deliver them from the Philistines, and they could not do it. So why is David successful? I would contend to you that perhaps had David stayed as the Saul servant boy and become what I would call a soft king, I don't think that man ever delivers the Israelites from the Philistines. In fact, that boy is probably killed when the Philistine army marches and kills Saul. Instead, God sent him on a little bit of a training path. Don't you think when he was in Gath, he might have noticed where they kept their weapons, what time they woke up in the morning, where the strong men slept? When he went in and around all of Philistine territory, hiding from Saul, but also hiding from the Philistines, don't you think he might have learned about a back road or two, about a way of how to get into town without the enemy realizing it? But lastly, I would contend that these 600 men that originally joined David were not some 600 men warriors. You got to understand that this is a guy that, yes, he defeated Goliath, but it's a boy when he is kicked out of Israel. He's a shepherd. He's a musician. Who's going to follow the shepherds and the musicians? Probably shepherds and musicians. Are they your greatest warriors? And that's not to say that a few did not come with them because of the defeating of Goliath. But do you think those men would have killed battle-hardened Philistines had they not served for a year and a half as mercenaries? I don't think so. I think that from the day that Saul started trying to kill David, it was all part of God's plan for David, so that he could become the man that would one day become the king that would lead the Israelites away from the Philistines. And in fact, not only do I believe that's the case, I can prove it to you. The verse I showed you earlier, oh my God, 1 Samuel 19, 9 to 10. I left this underlined part out when we first looked at it. But the real verse reads, but an evil spirit from the Lord came on Saul. But God's not evil. So that is a contradiction. Why would God send an evil spirit? Why? Somebody give me an answer. Why do we think? Because he had to kick David out so that David could go through 7 years of hardship to become the man that would one day lead his chosen people away from their enemies and deliver them from the Philistines. This was all part of his plan. It's a 7-year plan. Think about that. Think about that the next time your grandkid doesn't get to their #1 college. That's a little part of his plan. This is 7 years that he lived in a cave so that he could one day become what God wanted him to be. Now, the reason that I am quite passionate about this story of David is because of my own life over the last 2 years. I'll give a very brief background. I went to UNC Charlotte, tried to play soccer, didn't really play very much, but graduated. I got into Carolina Law thanks to Roy Dixon, and got to my second year at Carolina Law, and for some unknown reason, decided I was going to join the Marine Corps. If you ever seen the movie A Few Good Men, Kevin Bacon is my reason for wanting to be in the Marines. He's the Marine in that, right? So in going through Marine training, there are two things on the officer side you have to go through. You know, the enlisted side goes to boot camp that you see Paris Island, San Diego, all that, and then they go to what's called MOS school, which teaches them their job. The officer side's a little bit different. The officer side, you have OCS, Officer Candidate School, which think boot camp, but if you're not good, they kick you out. And then they've got TBS, the basic school, which is where they actually teach you things. And it's not just boot camp terror. I went to OCS in May, or I guess it'd be June of 2020. And I did very well. I graduated my OCS class with a leadership award out of my battalion of about 500 Marines. And my plan was, I go into my 3rd year of law school, that's how many years ago, graduate, I would take the bar in July, and then in October, this would be October 2021, I would ship to TBS, the next school. And I remember, see, OCS, it's like hell 6.5 days a week, but they give you like a 3-hour chunk that you get to go to church on Sunday evenings. And the preachers there are all amazing people. And like, if you want to sleep during the service, that is absolutely fine. But on the last Sunday before we were going to graduate, I guess it would be Saturday when we graduate on Sunday, so we went to church a day early. I remember praying because I'd already won my award, but I wasn't the most happy with my award because if I'd have done a few things better, I would have been honored. And that'd have been a really big deal. I prayed, God, give me the discipline and strength to come back here in a year, in October of the next year, and be honored man at my TBS class. I distinctly remember saying it. I remember praying it. And I get back, I go to COVID Law School, and I go to take the July bar. The bar is split up into 2 sections. You've got your multiple choice and your essays. I failed that July bar by 5 points. In my essays, there's 6 essays, there's 1 big essay that's worth 50 points. The essay that I had was a prosecution of a murder case. And I was supposed to be the prosecutor and put forth a brief in support for this guy, being charged with murder and spending the rest of his life in prison. And I misread the instructions and wrote a 2-hour brief or 2-hour memo on how to defend that guy. And my grader gave me 0 out of 50 points. Now, if you ask around the legal profession, if you ask other bar graders, which by the way I did, most of the time those graders will give you some partial credit. I mean, if you got the law somewhat right, but my grader gave me 0 out of 50, and so I failed. Okay, that's fine. Round 1, done. Go to take the February bar. 5 days before the February bar, I get a letter that I've been administratively disqualified from taking the February bar because I did not resubmit proof of vaccination and a COVID test. Now you might say, why do you have to resubmit vaccine status? You can't get unvaccinated. And why do I have to resubmit a waiver? If I've already said I'm not going to sue you if I get COVID, I can't take that back. That's what I thought. I was wrong. Just a little side note, imagine calling Steve Fisher and telling him that. I had the shovel ready to go out back and go my but eventually I do pass the bar and I get a date of June of this year. And I'm getting excited to go. And on the 1st of May, I get a call from my commanding officer. Lieutenant Fisher, we're sorry to inform you, but you've been pushed back to October. And I'm sitting there like, what's going on, man? I know I screwed up, but this was my date. I was good to go. Very long story. If you know anything about the leaked Ukrainian Russian documents, basically the DoD wants to mandate a little bit more cybersecurity, and as such, cybersecurity officers are being taken over lawyers right now. And they prioritize which lawyers got kicked out based on the number of times it took them to pass the bar. So I get pushed back to October. And I'll say in May when I got this, I work for my father-in-law currently, and I punched a brick wall. I was very, very angry, not happy. And I at that point in time in my life, I was a big believer in free will, and that while God has a good idea of what I'm going to do, I'm doing my own thing, and he's got a good guess. And my wife kept screaming at me, God's got a plan, God's got a plan, God's got a plan. Well, happened to be one day we missed church. I don't remember where we were, and we listened to a service on the way back from where we were. And that service was on Psalm 34. Now, this is David who's writing this while he's reflecting on his time in Gath the first time. And it's actually an amazing psalm that in the Greek alphabet, each verse of the psalm, each line starts with a different letter of the Greek alphabet. So it goes like an order. So imagine like A and then B and then C. But the big part of the psalm we get to is right here. I sought the Lord and he answered me. And the entire sermon that we listened to was on that right there. What's that? Somebody tell me, say it. What is it? A comma. Comma. What's comma mean?
Pause.
Pause. The sermon was that if David was here today singing this psalm to us, that would not be I sought the Lord and he answered. There would be a 10-minute harp solo in between those two phrases, because that's what he means. I sought the Lord and he answered me. There's a break. It takes time. 1 Peter 6:5. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you in due time. Not what I want my way in my time. What he wants his way in his time. I know that a year from now, when you read in the Salisbury Post that local banker's kid wins honor grad at TBS, it will be because God has used this 2 years of my life as a training arm, as similar to David's story. I don't want to relate myself to David because I'm not David. But maybe if I had shipped back in October of 2021, I'd have been 2 months married. Do we think that'd be a great idea? Be married for 2 months and go off for 7 months? That might have hurt me a little bit. Maybe I didn't have my stuff, we'll call it, together well enough to win honor grad at TBS if I can't even get a COVID document into the bowl. Maybe I was not in shape enough to go in June. And that God said, dude, you need another 6 months if you're going to win honor. I truly believe that that has been his plan for me. And I know that you guys sitting here are probably all going, yeah, I remember when blank happened to me and it turned out to be the best thing. I'm not trying to reteach that. I know you have way more life experience than me and know that. But I just want to be a reminder that the next time something in your life happens, it doesn't seem the best, or your kid, or like I said, your grandkid not getting into the school. It's all part of his plan. If you look at it from a decade later on, you look back and go, wow, that really sucked, but I'm so glad it happened. So that's the message I want to share with you today. If you just bow your heads in prayer and I've gone along. No, I'm still good.
Wait a minute, I'm gonna tell you something.
Okay.
All these other guys were going to college like Danny Williams, and people getting married, and I got eyes. Uncle Sam sent me a letter, so I don't want you. So I went, so. And in boot camp, first get there, I'm down in Texas. It was in January. It was sweet. And it was always, you know, taller cat. So I was in the very back. And when I started running, so I took my hand, got it burned. By the time I got my hand up, like the guy was there, said, hit the ground. And when I hit that ground, I said, oh God, I ain't gonna make it to boot camp. And then after I got out of boot camp, of course, the girl that I had been dating, she sends me a Dear John letter. I said, what else is going to happen? But, you
But
know,
looking back on it, was the best thing for you?
yeah, it was, and, you know.
But at the time, it didn't seem like the worst thing.
No, oh God, I thought it was good. But I made it.
Yeah, and you're better for it.
Oh, yes.
I know, that has been just a big thing for me, that it might not be the greatest right now, but when you look back on it, it's gonna be, you're gonna look back on it. So just about, yes.
Spikes, I'll take it. I sympathize with you. I hated Carolina Law School every minute I was there. But as far as passing the bar, none of our class members would ever pass the bar. They'd go inside. Okay, it was bad. Okay.
We definitely need a prayer after
That was great. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for the example you set in our lives through the story of David, through the story that we might not always hear about David. And we ask you to remind us the next time that something happens that isn't exactly what we want or we plan, to remember David and to remember the example that you set. Whether that be today, next week, 5 years, 10 years, we know that you have a plan for it, and we thank you for it. Amen.
Amen. Wonderful.
And